Did you know that there are some quick and easy things that you can do to make your internet faster and your computer perform better? Want to know more? I'm on Top of It, the John Top of It podcast with John Meisberg, connecting you with all things interesting and helpful. Welcome to episode number 4, where we're going to be talking all about networking, the internet, and the computers we use with them. First, whether you use a desktop, a laptop, a tablet, or just your smartphone, they're all the same thing at their core, computers. And if you're like me, I'm sure you've experienced your computer running slower than usual at some point. Well, in this episode, we'll learn how to keep your computer performing at its best. Second, whether you live in an apartment or a huge house, you probably have a router wirelessly sending internet to your computer to use. But have you ever noticed that the connection is weaker in some areas than others? Well, in this episode, we'll learn how you can use something called a mesh network to make your internet faster. And finally, if you work in a company where you connect to their internet, I'm sure you've wondered before, is someone spying on what I'm doing online? And if they are, what do they care about? Well, in this episode, we'll learn the truth and a whole lot more. My guest today is Matt Tochterman, who is a network specialist at the University of Washington. He has a ton of experience working not only in network support, but in computer support as well. He also has a ton of experience practicing patience. We'll learn why by hearing some of his best, worst, and funniest stories supporting employees. Enjoy!
Hey, Matt.
How's it going, John?
Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
So, you have a lot of experience working with supporting technology.
I do. Yes.
And so you've worked in several roles supporting computer-related issues, and currently you're a network specialist.
Yes, yeah, with the University of Washington, which is one of the larger networks in at least the Seattle area, if not the whole Washington state.
Wow.
Yeah, we've got just a few people between University of Washington main campus, we've got University of Washington Bothell and Tacoma campuses, and we also support the 3 main medical centers in the area, which are Harborview Hospital, the only Tier 1 trauma center in the Pacific Northwest, Northwest Hospital, and University of Washington Medical Center. So
that's a lot of places.
yeah, I think we have somewhere in the ballpark of 1,000 switches. If you figure they're 48 ports each, that's 48,000 devices at some capacity or the other.
And at any point in time, you could just shut those things off.
I have the power, yes.
Bye-bye, Facebook.
Yes, goodbye. You're done now.
So I think a lot of people out there are probably thinking, what is a network specialist? So maybe we could just start from just basic terminology. Like if you were to describe what you do to a 5-year-old.
Actually, the way I explain this to my nephew is I bring the internet to people. It exists as this big ubiquitous concept and construct that we all use and depend on a daily basis. But until somebody actually tells you, hey, we've got a network over here, we want it to get out to Comcast or whatever your ISP is, and this is how we're going to do it, you just stay your own little local network and you're stuck. So a network specialist, in at least my capacity, is someone who creates those networks and implements them in a way that allows for everything to communicate properly. I'm not sure that was quite 5-year-old level, but
I think it was started as 5-year-old
yes.
and slowly started transitioning into a college level, but that's okay. Yeah. I mean, I feel like hopefully our listeners are above 5, but it's a good place to start. That's one of my favorite subreddits is explain to me like I'm 5, because I think simple is a good way to understand.
Yeah.
So what got you to want to become a network specialist? How did you get into it?
Well, it was just something that always was fascinating to me because I started out just doing PC repair and things like that, which just started because somebody gave me a graphics card they weren't using when I was 14. And I was like, well, what's this do? Where can I put this? And it's kind of snowballed from there. And I just learned how, complex, they're actually not that complex. Don't tell anyone I told you, how complex computers are and the networks that they run on. And to me, the networking aspect is the closest thing that we have to magic in modern day. If you look at some of the newer applications out there for it, like, your smart locks at home, anything that's voice command activated, those mostly in a home setting run on wireless. So just the fact that we have this ability to reach in our pockets and grab out a device that has the entire summary of human knowledge, and it's just doing it magically through no wires, no anything.
You'd probably be burned at the stake.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh,
if this was happening hundreds of years ago.
Yeah, if we were in Salem, if you pulled out a picture of someone's dad on Facebook, you'd absolutely get burned at the stake. And I think that's, awesome that we can do it.
That'd be such a great Google Assistant or an Alexa commercial. It's like, hey, Alexa, do this. And then it happens. And then somebody goes, burn her.
There's a witch, maybe burn her. Alexa turned me into a newt.
That's so funny. Okay, so something that I've read about that network specialists do is that they monitor traffic on a network, and they maybe will end up blocking or allowing certain data to come through on that network. So I guess my first thought when I think about that is what parents try to do to prevent their children looking at things like pornography. But in a corporate setting, what are some of the typical use cases that comes up?
Well, so we're kind of in a unique setting at university level where we're not really in the business of policing your traffic. We can certainly monitor and say, hey, maybe don't go to ibuygunsontheblackmarket.com or we'll flag you or something. But a lot of the stuff that's out there, even in some of the more sketchy aspects, can be potentially educational in nature, or someone might be using part of the dark web to write a research paper on. So we don't...
Wait a minute. Writing a paper on the dark web so that nobody knows who wrote it? Or
No, I'm sorry. Using the dark web as a topic for a speech. They might need to access something on the dark web and
I see.
document
For quote unquote research purposes.
Yeah, or whatever you might call it. But so in my capacity, we don't do that as much, but at one of the sites I worked at, they used to. And the things that they typically would be looking for is online gambling, obviously pornography. They had some of the bigger time wasters blocked, like Facebook, YouTube, but that went away when the hospital employing those rules got acquired by University of Washington, because we can spend all day playing the you're not allowed to go to this site game, and at the end of the day, a good majority of the people don't want to get fired, so they kind of act accordingly, and by and large, we don't really have any flagrant abuse of the network.
Times have definitely changed, because I remember in one of my earlier roles in my career, Facebook did get banned in the company, but now most places I've worked at, or most places that my friends work at, it's totally socially acceptable now to go on there here and there, or sometimes I even see groups on Facebook for the teams. So it's becoming more and more socially acceptable in a corporate environment for that tool to not be blocked.
And I've had some interesting conversations with people just last week where I was at a big networking convention in Las Vegas. And that actually is one of the issues that came up is we have all these users, and what we were finding is that people are creative, and if they want to do something, they're pretty much going to do it. Yeah, exactly. So
wouldn't you rather monitor what they're doing, or potentially, if you have the ability to potentially monitor what they're doing, if you needed to, by allowing them to do it on the corporate network, than to block it and then they just use their phone to do it anyway?
Yeah, and if they're on the network on their phone, on the wireless, and then you can maybe go down that route and track it. But yeah, it goes back down to, if somebody's being a bad actor and they're spending all their time on Facebook at work, it's much easier to track that while it's on the network. So, for that reason, it's just something that they didn't really get into. But
see, I don't know how that would work in my role, for example, because I'm probably rarely on Facebook interacting per se, but I do have it up the entire time.
Yeah.
So I wonder how that gets registered on a network by people who could potentially monitor it. But I also think that people who are monitoring networks, they have bigger fish to fry.
And that's 90% of what it boils down to is look, if somebody's going to be on Facebook, then they're going to come back and say, oh, I was on my lunch break. And is that really a worthwhile use of your network administrator's time? And I can guarantee you it's not.
But I do think that type of technology is useful for a lot of reasons, and not just in a company, but maybe I think about if I were a parent, the internet is so addicting. And
Absolutely.
So how would I raise children given that? I've seen that some of these new routers allow you to pause the Wi-Fi in your house when it's dinner time. So if you want your kids to eat dinner or go to sleep or do their homework, I guess you need the internet to do your homework now. But like, it's interesting that you could have that ability to shut it off in your house as a way to control when somebody interacts with the network. And I have wondered, like, would I be that kind of parent, or would I just be like, you know what, make good choices? Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of features out there. Just looking at routers today, actually, because I need to do my home network since we just moved. And there's apps. You can control it all from an app on your phone anymore. You just, okay, well, this user or this MAC address or this device isn't allowed from this time to this time. And,
So related to what I was talking to you about, people who work as a network specialist, that they have bigger fish to fry most of the time when it comes to overseeing a network, right? Like they're not watching every particular person and being like, how are they interacting with this website? Or have they been on Facebook for too long, kind of thing. But the more I think about it, I bet that the way that the firewall is set up, that there are a lot of rules in place for what is allowed to be accessed and what isn't allowed to be accessed, to where you don't really need to monitor because it's kind of self-governing.
Yeah, and in most enterprise settings, that's the case. Yeah, like I said, we're kind of a unique little bubble in our world where, because of the educational and medicine aspects, we don't deal with a whole lot of the actual security that companies like F5 or Amazon or Google, and even those might be bad examples because they have this laid back, carefree atmosphere. But if you're working in the finance industry or something along those lines, then absolutely, yeah, there's a lot of filtering that they do, or website access prevention, that they just set up an internal firewall. And if it says, hey, this domain, I'm trying to get to it, it just denies.
Unfortunately, in one of my first roles that I ever had, I was working at a TV station. They did not have one of those firewalls in place. I was a multimedia producer, and I was doing research on the topic of the White House. And I think I went to whitehouse.com, and it was a pornography site. And it came up and my heart stopped. I was 18 years old, and I'm like, I'm in trouble.
Yep, we're fired.
I'm in trouble. Yeah. And so I remember just exiting out and thinking, okay, well, there's somebody in this building that sees everything.
Yeah.
And like, so that's going to get registered and that's going to get reported. What do I do? And I immediately went to my manager and I told him what happened. I'm like, look, I went to a porn site. And he was like, what? I was like, I went to a porn site. I mean, I didn't mean to. Like, I went to whitehouse.com. I was trying to do research. And he's like, don't worry about it. Anyway, what is the protocol when something like that does happen though? Like, have you experienced something like that yourself where you saw activity with something that you were like, they shouldn't be doing that here? And then what are you supposed to do?
And see, that's kind of an interesting question, because even if I see somebody doing something that's, unless it's potentially going to be bringing harm to anybody, it kind of falls under the, well, it's not really my job category. If I believed that they were being malicious and if I believed that they were going to do something with bad intention, absolutely, I could get that user's username and then go through the system and see what exactly it is they've been doing to some degree. We have security teams that actually deal with that specific sort of thing. But with just a username, it's possible for probably most network administrators, depending on what platform they're running, you can trace a user through a building. You can say, okay, well, I know they're looking at this type of website and they're going to these places, so maybe that's a security threat. As the identity prevention systems that hackers use get more elaborate, so do the tracking systems that the good guys come up with. So it's always kind of this little quiet war that 90% of people don't ever think about or see, that, somebody's always fighting to try to not be seen on a network. And there's ways to do it, and there's also ways to get found.
So what percentage of employees in a company do you think see people who work in your role as like a big brother type of person versus what percentage do you think see you as how you just described it? That like, unless it's malicious, I don't really care. Because honestly, I kind of wish I had known that about what you do when I was younger. Because I think I probably lived in fear about it for a while, being very just careful about, not that I was going to anything particularly that would be malicious or anything or inappropriate, but more so maybe just not wanting to give the impression that I wasted any time at all. Like, I just wanted to show my employer that I was a good worker, that I got all my work done, that I wasn't wasting it. Maybe employees would feel more relaxed at work to be able to know that they can enjoy going to a website here and there to break up the monotony of their job.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny that you mentioned that, because that was kind of one of the first things that popped into my head when you mentioned the White House story. It's like, we are the network architects and we will come find you. It's like it's not like that. I mean, 90% of, I think, the cases where anybody has to dig into that kind of thing, it's like a manager has been like, dude, I don't know what this guy's doing at work all day. His performance numbers suck. We've caught him going to YouTube a few times. Like, can you just give us an idea of what's going on? And even that, I'm sure, probably has to be run through HR, and there's channels for it. But there is kind of this weird sense of like, they are watching us. And, because I used to work security, like physical security, escorting people out of buildings and stuff. And, I was sitting at a desk, an information desk for, 4 or 6 hours a day sometimes. And like, what am I going to do? I did all my homework there. That's how I got through college. But a lot of the times I go to like, a game website or something, or try to find something that wasn't blocked, because that was prior to the buyout where they got rid of the filters. And there's always a game to play or some unblocked website or some emulator that was up and running. But yeah, there's just kind of always this like kind of fear over the shoulder, like, man, somebody's going to be monitoring what I'm doing, and if they start watching this, like, well, it's just going to look like I'm sitting here at the desk doing nothing.
Yeah.
And even until I got into the business where I'm at now, it's like, I mean, maybe it's some of the bigger companies, Amazon is very big brotherish from what I've heard. They like to run their worker bees into the ground in the warehouses and all the other rumors that I can't speak to any truth on because I don't know firsthand. But
you're talking about like making you so efficient that like a minute is not wasted.
Exactly. Like you're limited to 2 bathroom breaks a day, and they can only be 5 minutes a piece, and that type of micromanagement.
Right.
In environments like that, I'm sure there's probably some closer monitoring, but my advice there would be find another job. You don't need to deal with that kind of negativity in your life.
Yeah. I wonder what that does to a person when they come home from work. Do they go to the bathroom and then like they can't get out of that mentality? Like, oh, I've been in here 1 minute. I gotta go. I gotta get back to work or else I'm not going to meet my goals.
I'm sure it makes you prioritize your time differently and value your home time more.
You're probably really good at leaving a TV show when a commercial comes on and coming back to the couch exactly when the TV show comes back on, because you're really good with knowing the time. Then.
Yeah, I'm sure you're very very aware of what you're doing and the time you're doing it in.
Okay, so let's talk about prioritizing bandwidth. Is that something that you do? Do you make sure that certain areas in the business have prioritization of bandwidth over others, or is that not something that's relevant at UW?
No, it totally is. One of the biggest things that we do for that is quality of service. It's QoS. It's a term that you'll see pretty often throughout IT in general.
I'm familiar with it in the context of wanting to not lag in a video game, or to not buffer while watching Netflix, is that you can say, I want these things to have number one priority to the bandwidth and then make everyone else suffer.
Right. Yeah. And there's different requirements that we have in place that, if you're reaching a certain quality of connection and you're on an IP phone or something, we do have much higher quality of service requirements for a phone because the voice data is significantly higher. So in order to have a high quality phone call that doesn't sound like you're through a tin can, your data needs to be processed efficiently. So that's one of the big things that we ensure gets done.
So for like conference calls or like video conference calls.
So we don't do a whole lot of video, and the video that we do doesn't generally fall under a quality of service category, but we also have a very robust network, and we're kind of spoiled in the sense that
universities tend to have pretty fast internet.
Yeah, we do. It's funny. I was just reading an article. I believe it was like Brown or Yale or one of the big Ivy League colleges where they actually started blocking Netflix because the bandwidth was being saturated and they couldn't deliver their quality service. So they just said, okay, no more Netflix. And that's not something that we run into because we are more or less our own ISP. We have major fiber terminals or backbones through all the Seattle metro area. So generally speaking, if we need more bandwidth, we get it.
Well, the reason why I know that universities tend to have very fast internet, at least in other countries, is that before torrenting, FTP servers was really common to be able to download things that you wanted to download. And they always tended to be in universities in European countries. They had gigabit connections. And when you moved a file from one FTP server at one university and moved it to another one that had the same ridiculously fast internet, you could move an entire movie in like a second. It was just like unbelievable.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Because we, despite more or less inventing the technology, we haven't really, we didn't adapt it quite as fast, I think. You know,
we're no South Korea.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. You talk about fast internet. We're a little bit slower. We're a lot bigger. So that's kind of where our main issue comes from, is by the time we're done laying T1 line, well, it's already outdated. We're up to T5. Oh, yeah. Great. Okay.
But I also think they don't think it's profitable.
Right. And in European countries, you know, if they want to run a new fiber line, it's like, okay, well, it's going to serve 80,000 people because the population density is through the roof compared to, you know, the Midwest or Arkansas.
Yeah.
Oregon, and you know, you name it. So we're a lot slower, but yeah, universities do tend to have much better internet because it's supported by both the federal government and student loans. So they have a lot more funding to play with when it comes to implementing new services and making sure that their students have the best quality service and experience.
Yeah, at least it's going towards something useful.
Yeah.
And not just like printer cartridges or something.
Oh, yeah, it does. It still goes to that.
So what kind of internet do you have at home? Comcast?
CenturyLink. Yeah.
CenturyLink.
Yeah, fiber. Full gig.
Wow.
It's just something nice to have. And for the price, there's really, in our situation, not much of a reason not to get it, because I think ours is $85 a month, which to anyone in Europe, yeah, $85 a month. But to anyone else in the US, it's like, oh, wow, that's cheap, man. As opposed, I think the next step down was a crazy reduction, like 250 megabytes per second. And then you're still only looking at like $65 a month. So it's like, well, yeah, I'll pay the extra $20 and triple my bandwidth. Like, a very cost efficient.
So
jump.
Do you notice a difference in the things that you do online with having a gigabit connection versus maybe in the past when you had Comcast or another ISP with a slower connection? Do you notice the difference in what you do? Like, I can't imagine that it makes a difference with things like going to Facebook, but maybe like downloading a file or streaming a 4K show or...
Yeah, it's streaming is pretty much, I don't want to say the only place I've seen a difference, but it's the only place I've seen a significant difference. Since we got the gigabyte connection, I don't think I've seen Netflix buffer. It has to load on the smart TV because, you know, it's got to load. That's using the CPU
app.
And the actual program that's on the TV itself. But as soon as the actual application is loaded, anything that it needs to connect to the internet to get is just there.
Well, I imagine professional online gamers benefit from having a gigabit connection because basically lag free or just very low lag, which allows them to have somewhat of a timing advantage of moving before the other person or seeing things before they happen for the other people.
It's definitely a much more seamless experience. You're not going to be seeing like the lags or the latency that tends to cause that sort of thing to happen. But it's been 5 years since I've done any serious PC gaming, and in that time we've kind of come a very long way.
Growing up sucks.
Yeah. It's like, I just want to play Modern Warfare too.
I just want to play some video games, man.
Yeah.
So you have this ridiculously fast internet in your house. You're a network specialist. So I imagine you have a bunch of different smart devices around your house, or you're working on it because I know that you just moved into a new house. What have you done so far with your own personal network? And what are your plans for the next year or so to trick it out?
Well, that's, before we got the house, I was in a small condo, and I really had no interest in doing anything IT at home. And none of the smart devices had any interest to me. I didn't want a smart fridge because it's just one more vector for attack for hackers, because I'm sure in Samsung in 10 years, the top thing on their to-do list is going to be like, oh, we need to update the firmware for our refrigerators for WPA3.
And then in the middle of the night, you're like, honey, why is Ice Cubes coming out?
Yeah.
The hackers.
Yeah, the hackers got my ice cubes. Yeah, no, I currently have, some smart locks that are super convenient because I am forgetful and not always fully awake in the morning. So when we leave the house, it eliminates the, crap, did I lock the door? And you just pull out your phone, you got your app, and shoot, there he goes. Door's locked. Okay. And we have our lights, some of our lights on the Philips Hue app, which is, I am not endorsed by Philips in any way. It's been pretty nice to have because, again, you're laying in bed, you're tired, and it's like, oh man, I left the living room light on. Well, you just pull up the app and turn off the lights, and you scroll Facebook for another half an hour before you fall asleep. So,
or you can set a schedule to where like they come on at a certain time to set the mood.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. There's so many different automation systems out there now. But like I've got a friend who, a coworker of mine, was telling me that he set up some sort of a proximity sensor so that when his wife's phone gets in range of the house, the garage door opens. Which, again, I worked security in the past, the physical, escorting people out of buildings and locking stuff up. To me, I don't know that I would personally ever create that sort of a proximity sensor, but the technology's there, and that's maybe for an interior door cool. But
because you feel like someone could somehow get it to activate that isn't his wife.
Yeah, it's an extremely unlikely scenario, but say that their phone got stolen or.
And then he found out that it activates the garage. Yeah, and then he comes over.
I mean, let me get my tinfoil hat on here. But yeah, it's a security risk.
It's possible.
Yeah, it's possible. And, if somebody was out there and this is the more likely scenario, if somebody was sitting out there and had some sort of a traffic sniffer program running, they could potentially see that type of interaction over the air. If it hits the wireless network, it's a lot harder to do with Bluetooth. But if it goes out over Wi-Fi, and it's not an encrypted network, hackers can sniff that data right out of the air. So if there's some sort of an authentication or a passphrase, or I don't have these devices, I don't know fully how they work, but to me, it seems like that could be potentially opening yourself up to some form of exposure that you don't really need in your life.
So less possibilities for something like that to happen, the better, for sure.
Yeah, the best security is just not creating the opportunity in the first place.
So any other smart devices, or do you have like the Alexa, the Google Assistant kind of thing?
Yeah, we've got a Google Home that we use to control the lights and the locks, which is pretty neat. Walk by and, hey, Google, activate home defenses or whatever, and it just does whatever.
And your dogs come out.
Yeah, and they all start barking, and then Alexa starts barking back. But no, as far as home automation and smart devices, I think that's about it for now. But we moved into the house, 3 months ago now. So not horribly long period of time to get this type of stuff set up. We've been focusing mostly on furniture and things like that first.
I saw that they had a coffee maker that is smart.
Yes.
That you can just like press something on your phone and brew you a cup of coffee. I don't know if it's any good, but it's kind of neat. I would love an espresso machine that could do that.
Yeah.
It's just like, make me a shot. Boop.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I might've been looking at the same one you did, and I was like, oh man, I could do that and just set it up the night before. But then, it's another one of those things where I think the tech is just progressing to a point where it's doing it just to be tech,
Right.
My coffee maker at home already has a preset function.
Yeah.
So I put the coffee grounds in,
right.
Put the filter in, fill the water up, and it goes off at 6 a.m. every day.
Yeah, I guess you just get one of those coffee machines with the timer.
Yeah, I think mine was built in 1992 and works fine. So
don't get me started about older things working better. That's planned obsolescence. I hate it.
Oh, I know. We'll that could be a podcast in and of itself.
Planned obsolescence.
Be happy to join you for it.
Yes, I freaking hate it. All of the old things that I've inherited from my parents or like my girlfriend's parents, like all that stuff works great.
Oh yeah.
And then you buy something new from Amazon and it breaks in a year.
Yeah. It's like, well, it's only $5. I'll replace it. Meanwhile, there's a trash patch in the Pacific Ocean the size of Texas, but yay, no big deal. We can replace it.
The Earth, I guess, if we can get to Mars in time.
Yeah. Be like, oh, look at all that trash down there. Glad we don't live there.
So one of the smart devices that I've recently installed in my house is security cameras so that I could watch my dogs play in the backyard while I work from home. And when I first set it up, I had trouble getting an internet connection to some of the cameras. Mm-hmm. And so I actually had to go out and buy a really, really powerful router that could get the signal there. And that fixed the issue for me. But then I started reading about how there's other options than just buying a really powerful router. You can create something called a mesh network in your house. Maybe before I go too much further, could you explain what your idea of a mesh network is, and then maybe I could talk about what I've researched.
Yeah, and this is something that I just bought a wireless mesh system today to install at my house, because previously it was more or less the model was you get a wireless router and you just get your antenna set up and you blast it at full blast and get it as far as you can get it to go. That's not actually how they're supposed to be set up, especially if you're in a high density area, unless you don't like your neighbors. But that was kind of the model before. It's just kind of like, spray and pray and maybe put it in the middle of the house with the antennas oriented properly if you're lucky.
I'm pretty sure that's how most people still have their internet set up.
Yeah. Yeah. And
we're talking about it like it's 1950s.
I'm a little bit biased. It's kind of what I do for a career more and more these days. So,
yeah.
But it's much more fine-tuned to go with the mesh wireless network route, because it takes this concept of just kind of blasting out this nuclear bomb of radiation and its Wi-Fi signal, and you can make it a lot more precise. You can put it in if you have an area that you know is weak, and it's like on the far end of the house, and it's through some maybe like plaster walls or some really thick wood that's got some density. You can much easier address those types of situations with these mesh systems, because when you put first kind of backpedal, the router, the main component of the system, you plug into your internet connection from your ISP, and that generates the network itself.
That's what most people have.
Right. And so that is just one component of the mesh system, because that exists in both the old style and the new style of these mesh APs. So you set up your router just like you would if it were a traditional system. And then there are we're called satellites or access points.
I've heard them referred to as just smaller routers or nodes on a network.
Yeah. Yeah. And both those are correct as well. They're
I feel like calling them a smaller router is a more accessible term for a person who already knows what a router is, I guess. Yeah.
So I guess if we're getting technical, they're not actually routing traffic. They're just forwarding it. So they'd be more like wireless switches in a sense, but they're not actually actively processing the stuff. They're more just handing it off to get it back to the router. They're piggybacking off of each other, essentially.
See. And you put them around the house.
Yeah. So
and it creates like a blanket of internet.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So let's say if you just imagine, the style of house that everybody drew when they were 5 years old, right? It's a square with a triangle roof. Probably don't need to do the attic. So let's say you have 4 rooms, 2 upstairs, 2 downstairs. And let's say it's a big house. So those rooms, whatever, we'll just say 500 square feet each. Well, if you put one of these access points in each room, they will communicate across the wireless network. And that's how they communicate back to the router. It doesn't rely just on one point to blast the whole place. It actually communicates, and they're even somewhat intelligent. I've seen ones that when one fails, they will actually kind of do a recalculation so that the topology changes along with to accommodate for the failure.
Define topology for the listeners.
Sorry. Yeah. So the network topology is just a map, basically. If you put it on a piece of paper, it would just look like, okay, well, this is where this device is, and this is how it connects back to the router. So yeah, if a device fails, it can actually fail over and go find the next closest mesh point and then use that as its backhaul, which they call the backhaul. It's just the bit of bandwidth that it's using to communicate with the router.
So it's more resilient to interference or other disturbances.
Yeah. And failure. So
that's a big perk of a mesh network over just a traditional network.
Yeah.
What I wanted to talk to you about is how I've been reading online about how mesh networks have been really useful in situations of natural disasters. So can I read to you a few things that I found on this?
Yeah, totally. Let's hear it.
Okay, so when Hurricane Sandy struck in 2012, there was a neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York, called Red Hook that was especially exposed to the damage of Hurricane Sandy. It took out their internet, and they had no running water, blah, blah, blah. And so they were in big trouble, and they couldn't even call. They had no cell phone service.
Yeah.
And I think because the internet service providers in an area like Comcast, they act as a central gatekeeper that ultimately control the access point to what you need to get to the internet. So there was a nonprofit organization that was called the Red Hook Initiative that worked to get the internet back in Red Hook through a project called Red Hook Wi-Fi, where they installed these, they call them nano stations, but they installed them on rooftops around the entire neighborhood. And the purpose was to provide communication between each station, and they used solar panels to power them. So I guess they didn't have to even plug them in. And so this provided internet to the entire community.
Yeah. Well, the cool thing about a setup like that is if it's, it does sound like essentially a large mesh network where you've got multiple access points that are communicating over a backhaul or, a dedicated channel that's only communicating with other units of the same infrastructure and not being accessed by the users. If it was that kind of setup, all it really needs is one, main router to route that traffic out to the internet. And yeah, absolutely. It could serve as a major network for, however many people are affected by that.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's interesting because we're kind of leaning towards that model. There are companies out there like Comcast has the their new cell service, and it operates kind of on that model. It essentially creates a network based off of all of their wireless routers, and it creates this giant mobile hotspot network that you can call using your cell phone. You can use it as a regular voice network. So it's basically creating a voice network using their wireless hotspot infrastructure.
That's really interesting.
So yeah, so that type of, at least that logic and that thinking and trying to get it to an application is out there. And I know that there are other companies out there looking to do the same.
Well, what people were saying is like beyond it being able to provide communication in spite of a natural disaster, that it also had the side effect of connecting the entire community to the internet, regardless of whether or not they could afford access.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you had everyone in Red Hook being able to get online, even if they didn't have the money to pay Comcast or whoever access to the internet.
Yeah.
And so then it's like, it's a powerful concept. Like imagine what that could do for the world. Yeah. Maybe we need to go that route and get a mesh network across this entire planet. I'm sure telecommunications companies do not want this, and they're not willing to invest in any kind of infrastructure that would destroy what they do. But it just seems like, think of how the human race could rapidly evolve if you got all 7 billion people online.
Yeah. It's absolutely, it would be fantastic to see that happen. And I'm sure, if you take that, even that little cluster of people and give somebody internet that maybe didn't have access to it before, well, maybe now these people are a little more empowered. They can go out and research things on YouTube or like Khan Academy or some sort of a learning environment where they can then learn a skill or a trade, or maybe host some sort of a service. Maybe they can do tutorials. Maybe it just opens up all sorts of opportunity for economic growth, not just for, the individual, but anybody that's looking to benefit off of that as well. It can create entire new economies that, or at least economic growth that wouldn't have had any other possibility otherwise.
Right. Like we hear in American news talks of let's make public colleges tuition free, but really they could start cheaper and just give internet to everyone in the country.
Yeah.
Because that would definitely cost a lot less, and think of what that could do for economic growth in our country.
Yeah, I think we definitely look a little bit too short term on things like that. And well, it's the cost and the investment. And okay, but when all these people are more educated and know, about the wireless network, guess what? You can then hire them. And would that not be in your interest if somebody that now has internet because they didn't before and they researched some protocols and now, hey, guess what? They just developed the next new generation of wireless security.
So I know that in some countries, the internet is a public utility, which in my opinion, it should be, because it's just as important as access to water or electricity. Like it's how you apply for jobs. It's how you communicate. It's the critical component of modern human existence, in at least my opinion. So if Ajit Pai, you ever happen to listen to this, maybe give that some thought. He's definitely listening right now.
Yeah, I'm sure. FCC. For those who are maybe younger, he's the chairman of the SEC and also a former Verizon lawyer.
He's the most liked person on the face of the planet.
Absolutely. We'll go with that.
So, okay, final network specialist question. How does working as a network specialist translate to your social life? So, are you also a social network specialist? Are there transferable skills that you have acquired from thinking about how networks work in general with technology and somehow applied it to how you interact with people?
Oh man. Yeah. Hitting the big questions here. I'm definitely a social media addict. My dog's Instagram account is a testament to that fact. Lily McGilligan, the corgi, if you can all manage to spell that. It's an interesting concept, the parallels between social networking and human networking. And I always kind of joked when I started taking a job in IT, if the two people are fighting and, whatever, you got to sort it out. It could be for any reason whatsoever. He could have done something 3 months ago that she didn't like, or she could have said something that reminded him of his dad, or, whatever. There's an infinite number of reasons why something could be not working. Where in computer networking, it's like, well, something's wrong. There's a problem to fix. There's a 0 where there should be a 1, and I can fix that. So
it's easier to identify the root cause.
Yeah.
Or there's more likely one root cause, where in like a social dynamic, there might be a plethora.
Yeah, and I'll tell you that it's made me really good at one game. It's actually, see, you have it here in your living room. It's called Ticket to Ride. Because one of the things that networking has kind of taught me to do is this might get a little technical, but when calculating how you go about getting from point to point, right? There are different values associated with different types of networks, right? So if you're going off of an old T1 line, it's like really old, you get like 100 meg a second. I don't know off the top of my head what T1 speeds are, but you're only going 100 feet. Is that going to be faster than taking a gigabit connection that you have to then route all the way out to like New York and then all the way down to like Sacramento and then all the way back up to Seattle? Which trip is going to be faster? So it's definitely made me think in terms of efficiency a lot more.
That's like one of those SAT questions.
Yeah. It's something that I would have failed in high school for sure. But math was not my forte. But as far as humans as a social network and computers as a social network, single points of failure suck. And that applies to both humans in a workplace and networks. One of the things that we try to do is engineer redundancy, which means just to make sure that if something goes down, you're still up and running. You're not going to lose your network. You're not going to lose your data, your work, whatever. That does actually translate really well into how humans work, and at least our work lives or our work environments, where if you have, Kathy from accounting, she knows all the master passwords. She knows, how the books work. She knows everything. But there's no documentation, and she gets a better offer at Microsoft.
Or passes away.
Yeah, and that's...
God forbid, rest her soul.
Yeah, poor Kathy. This figment of my imagination is now gone. It definitely kind of reinforces that as just the need for redundancy and how single points of failure can be bad no matter what type of system they're in. Now you got me thinking. We'll come back to that if I come up with anything.
Yeah, that's totally cool. So I've read that one of the best ways for a network specialist to socialize at work is to change the Wi-Fi password and then talk to everyone about what's going on with the internet.
Yeah, well, I'll make some friends for sure that way.
So we've talked about how you've worked as a network specialist, and before that role, you worked in IT support.
Yes.
So when you are receiving tickets, which for listeners who don't know what that means, it's like a request for help by a user. When you receive a ticket, like what percentage of those tickets are related to just issues with their computer? What percentage ends up being something they did on their computer or something that they don't understand, like software wise? And like what percentage is peripheral type of accessory?
Let's see.
Like a printer or like a monitor or...
So a lot of the issues that I would have to respond to on a more frequent base were printer issues. It seemed like they never stopped.
Because they're built to suck.
There's two great comics out there about printers. One is by the Oatmeal. It's called Why Printers Were Sent from Hell to Make Us Miserable. I don't think I need to explain that one too much. It's very accurate. I have it signed by the author hanging in my office. And the other is Doghouse Diaries, The Evolution of the Fax Machine. And it shows a picture of a fax machine invented in 1980, and then another one in 1990, and then another one in 2000 and in 2010. And they're the exact same picture of the exact same fax machine. And I think that's pretty accurate as well. But so, yeah, I'd say probably 33%, probably about a third of all of our tickets were probably printer or, monitor, kind of keyboard, mouse. Actually, if you throw in keyboard and mice, that's probably up to like 40%. People find never-endingly new and creative ways to destroy mice and keyboards.
Especially on April 1st.
Oh, God. Yeah. Yeah. Well, why did you duct tape it to the bottom of the chair, Susan? So I'd say probably about 20 to 30% of the remaining tickets are applications. And it depends, again, on the environment. If you're in, when I was in the hospital, working at the hospital, not a patient, we had dozens of different departments with dozens of different workflows. And I think at one point we had a list of 299 supported applications. So, it's like, oh, well, my Orca isn't connecting to Print Now. Well, okay, let me go research what those are and what they do and how they communicate. And
do you ever have to Google things for them? And while you're Googling it, you're like, why can't you Google this?
Absolutely. And it's,
that must be really frustrating.
Well, it was at first, but then this is one of the biggest takeaways that I had from working in desktop support is that this isn't their job. And it's probably a little intimidating. And
yeah, that makes sense.
When I was working in the the hospital, I kind of always just said, okay, well, you know what? If a nurse came up to me and was like, why can't you do this IV? I was like, because A, needles are scary. I'm terrified of needles. And B, that's not my job. So if I kind of put myself in their shoes, I think that created a lot more empathy and a lot more just kind of understanding of like, because, computers are scary, especially if you've been a nurse for 40 years and now all of a sudden they're switching from paper charts to online charts. And I just want to write my patient's vitals down. And why do we need to sign into 3 different applications? And this is dumb and it's not working. Like, I totally get that, having been on like the other side of the fence, So,
and it doesn't mean like they're unintelligent. It just means that people are good at different things, and some people don't have the mind for it.
Yeah, and if you asked me to go take somebody's pulse, I'd be like, okay, 1, 2, 5. What's on dinner tonight? Oh, pulse. Right, he's dying. Okay, let's do this. It's
Matt. You got to stay in your lane.
I know. A little tricky sometimes. But yeah, so that was kind of a big takeaway is you really kind of, unless you start building that view of how they perceive the technology, you're going to get very frustrated very fast and probably maybe should consider another career.
Yeah. So like when you were first starting out, you were more frustrated, but then towards the end of that role, you learned to deal with it differently. So like I was going to ask, I know that you consider yourself to be a Buddhist. I don't know if you are a like practicing, but like, does that factor in any way with how you were able to keep your cool with dealing with these users?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't even really necessarily the users all the time that were the issue, and there certainly were a few, but a lot of it for me would be I'd get frustrated with the situation and say, man, this is dumb. Why isn't this working? I don't understand. Kind of one of the philosophies that I really enjoy about Buddhism is that it's not something that's happening to you. It's a moment that you're experiencing, right? So, the computer is not broken at you. It's just a thing that's happening right now. And if you sit there and observe it and say like, okay, why am I here? What am I feeling? And if you kind of just monitor yourself a little bit and be a little more introspective.
Kind of like fly on the wall, the situation.
Yeah, exactly. If you view yourself as a participant in an event and not something that the event is happening to, it's much easier to distance yourself, get a little more clarity, maybe step out of your own head a little bit and really think about what's going on. So instead of dialing in and like, why won't this peripheral install? This driver is outdated. I've tried so many times. It's like, it's easy to get wrapped up in that. So you take a step back and like, okay, so let's rewind. This is just something that's happening with this computer. How did we get here? Well, the driver wouldn't install. Okay, well, how did I arrive at that point? Well, I went to this website. Oh, well, that's the wrong manufacturer's website. So it's so easy to get overly dialed in on something especially when you are good at something. That's kind of one of the other components is you'll be like, oh, I know this. I've seen this. I've done this before. And you'll just dive right into it without really analyzing what's going on. So just kind of, the mindfulness component of Buddhism, or if you just want to generalize to Eastern philosophy, I think you can actually apply that in tech and
anything.
Yeah.
For sure. One of the most frustrating things for me when I'm trying to tech support an issue is to find a trail that could lead to the answer in like a forum on a website, and you're reading through the comments and people are talking about it. And in the title of the thread, it'll say solve. You're like, oh, thank God. Thank God. And then you're reading through the comments and you can't find the answer. Somebody at the very end will be like, thank you so much. It finally worked. And they don't even post what worked. They don't share exactly what they did to get it working. That should be one of the rules of the internet that everyone has to like learn in elementary school. You figure out the answer, you share it with everyone.
That would be called documentation. And it is a whole mysterious magic and art that I'm sure few understand and fewer practice. So it definitely would help things though, for sure. If people could just write down like, hey, by the way, I changed my IP address to this and my routing settings to this. And hey, my router works now,
I think over the years, I've gotten a lot better at not losing my cool when it comes to tech support. But I do remember when I was younger that my parents would come to me a lot for technical issues. And I just had such a short fuse with helping them. Yep. God bless my parents. I love them. But like, I was just so frustrated with the types of questions they would ask. Like, how could you not know this? I just have to stop and think. But then it's like, you have to understand they came from a different generation and they're not digital natives like we are. It's just a different generation. And so I try to be more understanding. And as I've gotten older, I've learned new types of ways to deliver information so that it helps them follow it better. Like chunking it out, delivering things in a logical sequential order, and understanding that they're going to take a lot more time to do something than I would. And so not losing my patience with how long they're taking to click on something.
Yeah.
That should take a second. That takes a minute.
And I think it's, again, we're kind of trained. I had computer lab as a class in elementary school. We would go do that like we would go do PE. So for us, at least for me, that was something, and I was born in 1990, just to give you some frame of reference here. So we were kind of adapting at the time to the technology. And once you start thinking in computer, thinking, okay, well, this is a menu. These are the general types of things a menu does. This is generally where, that's something that is not just necessarily applicable to that specific instance. If you can navigate a menu on a Mac, you can probably do it on a Windows PC, or, God forbid you're some crazy person like me that runs Linux. It's all kind of interchangeable now. And if you know the concept, you can generally execute it. Where I think a lot of the people who weren't necessarily a part of that growing up kind of still struggle a little bit with like, well, why is this menu in this place here? Or, well, if I go to the options in this menu, I can do this, but in this application, it's a little bit of a different spot. They expect kind of like an almost exact uniform sequence or, across experience.
Mm-hmm. One of the reasons why Apple is so successful is they've found a way to make the UI pretty consistent.
Horrible.
Consistently horrible.
Sorry.
I mean, but for the average user out there, they don't want to have to think.
Yes.
They want it to be so seamless. It's like, you go up to a door, you don't think about how to use it.
Right.
They just want it to work.
And I have actually a great example on that. My fiance's stepdad has recently changed the locks out in their house, right? Mm-hmm. Well, he inverted the doorknob and the deadbolt. So the deadbolt is where the doorknob is, and the doorknob is where the deadbolt is.
Oh, no.
And if you ever want to feel like an absolute idiot, try to open a deadbolt with your hand like a doorknob and then figure out, why is this door not opening? I am so confused right now. Oh, well, it's backwards, and that's kind of, I'm sure that's probably pretty similar to the feeling that some of these users experience. And that one experience has kind of shaped a lot of thoughts on things.
Has he kind of tapped you for IT type of help or network help? Or have you had your family in your life, they know what you do and they're like, ooh,
oh yeah,
hey,
yeah.
Matt, hey, want a beer? I got something for you to do.
Yeah. And, I'm always happy to help them. They've been,
yeah.
It's the irony is that the reason I got into computers is because I was grounded and had nothing else to do. And now here we are, me re-giving my parents internet access after they broke their stuff. And now the shoe's on the other foot, I have the power now. Do you want to call Comcast, Mom? Do you?
Please, God, no. Yeah. No, Matt, please.
You're at my mercy. You will get me something nice for Christmas. Thank you. No, but it's interesting. Although I will say some of my favorites are people that I haven't talked to in a long time that message me on Facebook. Hey, you're a computer guy, right? And I am. I'm not a dick about it. I'm not mean about it or rude. And yeah, I'll help you out if you have a problem for the most part. But
it's, I guess it kind of can be a little annoying if it's like someone in your life that you only hear from when they want help from you,
Yeah.
right? And then they don't talk to you after that too. And then it just kind of feels like in that Rick and Morty episode where Rick asks that knife robot, he's like, what is my purpose? And he's like, you pass butter.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that's all I am to you.
Yeah. And it's funny because having that just feeling of being used and like, is that all I am to you? It kind of made me think of like, if you're a really attractive girl, I'm sure that happens to them all the time, right? Guys just come up to them and then, you're really cute, whatever, let's hang out. And like, he's not interested in her. He's interested in what she has or what she could potentially give him. And then as a guy with IT knowledge, it's kind of like similar to that where somebody's like, oh, I only want your knowledge. And then when I'm done with you, here's your cab fare. Get back to your house. You know?
Makes you feel a little dirty.
It just makes you feel used as like, oh, okay, well, God. Yeah.
You got to wear a condom before you do tech support,
Yeah,
Matt.
exactly. So moral of the story, always use protection. Yeah, not a fun feeling. I fixed your computer and then you walk out of my life. Just like all the others.
I had friends like that growing up. I mean, I wasn't a computer expert by any means, but I knew enough to know way more than people around me. And that was enough. Like I could build computers. I could do some basic coding, but just knowing how to build a computer as a teenager makes you very valuable to your friends who don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
And I remember a friend of mine, he had a broken Dell desktop. He's like, you know a lot about computers. Same opening. They're going to the same website, same pickup artist for tech support.
How to get a tech guy to notice you.
They're like,
10 easy ways.
Yeah. They're like, hey, you fix computers. So I was like, yeah. I'm like, bring it over, see what's going on. And he plugs it in and it catches on fire. A flame comes out of the motherboard.
Nice.
And I just remember looking at it and then looking at him and then saying like, we're not fixing this computer. It's not gonna happen. And he's like, really? I'm like, yeah, really. It's on fire.
Yeah, unless you're a wizard or some sort of an alchemist and can shapeshift this. He has me beat. I've only ever welded a computer to a piece of metal on accident by plugging it in with the power supply not grounded.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it destroyed the computer. It destroyed the TV attached to it. It was no fun, and I was grounded.
In relation to parents having an issue, one of the best places to start if something is not functioning correctly is to turn it off and turn it on again. I can't tell you how many times that fixed issues for my parents, and it's such a duh thing for me, but it's not such a duh thing for a lot of people.
Yeah. I cannot tell you how many times I've experienced that. And it's something that honestly, I've had a very interesting experience with the phrase, have you tried turning it off and on again? Because it's the first lines of one of my favorite.
The IT Crowd.
Absolutely love that show. If you ever want a really, really good peek of what it's like to be in IT, that show absolutely crushes it. In the first episode, he picks up the phone and like the first lines of the show are like, hello, IT, have you turned it off and on again? And it becomes so ingrained in his responses to things that his mom calls. And he actually opens with that, hello, have you tried turning it off and on again? Well, no, Mom, I'm at work. And it's, it's that experience of like, oh God, again, I got to say this, but it's so true, man. It's, a lot of times computers are finicky and there's so much going on, man.
And smartphones too now.
Yes.
It's like a lot of people don't consider their smartphone to be a computer, but it absolutely is.
Yep.
And I can't tell you how many times either like a significant other or a friend talks to me about how their phone's so slow and they're ready to get a new one. I'm like, well, when's the last time you restarted it?
Yeah. And
it's like never.
Yeah.
You've never restarted
and
it.
they can't think of like they sit there with kind of deer in the headlight look like why would you restart a phone? And it's it's the same thing. Processes hang. It's just the things open and close and that creates entries in the memory in the RAM. And RAM is what's called volatile memory. So it'll retain data until it's told to clear it or until it's turned off. At which point it loses all of its charge. Right? It's basically a hard reset. Goes back to zero. So if you haven't powered off your RAM, it's kind of like changing the oil in your car,
And so for the listeners out there that don't even know what RAM is, like how could you quickly explain that to a 5-year-old?
It is the part that makes things happen. So when you click on something, that goes to the RAM. The RAM will actually load it from the hard drive. So it's kind of like short-term memory and long-term memory in your brain, right?
It's holding it temporarily.
Exactly. So
things can get stuck there.
Yeah, if you view it kind of like a Brita filter, if you have like a refrigerator, you get your filter, it's like a gallon filter, you fill it up, you put it in the fridge, right? Well, that water is kind of loaded a little bit now, and then when you're ready to drink it, you don't drink it. It's good to go. So I'm trying to think of a better analogy for it. So the big water reservoir out in wherever the county is, that's your hard drive, and that hard drive stores everything, right? And then when you click on something, you're basically saying, okay, water pipes, let's pull this up, and that'll pull it into your Brita filter. And then you can just drink it freely from there. But when do you change your Brita filter? When you restart your phone or when you restart your PC. It's kind of that sort of concept. Okay, let's start over from the ground up and we'll go from there.
So in some ways, a blue screen of death for a computer can be a blessing if it gets that user to restart their computer.
I've had times where we've had production computers up that have been running for months and months and months and months on end, and then finally something will happen and crash it and be like, well, it'll be faster now when it comes back.
I was reading this acronym online called PEBCAC. It stands for Problem Encountered Between Keyboard and Chair.
Yep.
So user error.
Exactly.
I had never heard that. I just thought it was pretty funny.
Yeah, it's we have another one in the networking world. This is going to be a little bit technical. I'll try to get to the important part. If you imagine like the internet as a sandwich, what the bottom is, what the next ingredient on top of that is. There's 7 different features that go all the way from like the physical media, like the copper or the fiber or whatever the actual electrical impulse is traveling along, all the way up to the top, which is the presentation layer, which is actually the information being presented to you. Man, I had to go back to school there for a second, my brain. Well, we always say that there's a layer 8 as well, and that's the user level. So if there's ever a network issue where it's like, well, did the user configure their IP address right? That's a layer 8 issue. And if you say that to somebody who's as nerdy as I am, which the odds are kind of slim, they might get it. And if they do, they will laugh, I promise. But
a layer 8 issue, I'll have to remember that.
Yeah.
That's good.
Next time you have a network issue, just say, hey, I have this problem. It's not a layer 8 issue. And if it goes to the right people, they'll get a good laugh, and they'll probably come and maybe even bring you a cup of coffee. I don't know.
So when you were doing support for people, how often did you talk them through an issue until they solved it on their own versus just connecting to their computer and controlling their mouse and fixing it for them? Like, what is the protocol for just being like, let me do it, I'll do it for you?
That depends heavily on workload and the type of user and what needs fixing.
So it's like a judgment call on your end.
Yeah, it totally is. A lot of the times, this is my personal preference. This is my personality, if you will, coming through. I like to just fix things and get it done and fix more things, because there's always enough things to fix where there's something else that needs fixing. So if I can remote in, it's just a minor issue, like, hey, I need a printer added, I can push a script to have that done remotely. I don't even need to come. I don't need to bother you. You're a nurse working on the ICU floor. I don't want to interrupt you with this kind of thing.
They're not going to get any benefit out of doing it themselves.
Right. For things like that, they just need an application on their computer, which they don't even have access to the server to install it anyway. Okay, cool. Let me just push that to your device and we'll get that done.
Have you ever remoted into somebody's computer and seen something that was either weird or embarrassing?
I am lucky. I have not. No, I don't think I ever have.
That's actually really hard to believe, considering how long you've worked in that role. But maybe it's because it's mostly in the corporate world and people are on their best behavior.
Yeah, and a lot of it was kind of shared devices, in a nursing floor or, in areas like that. Nobody really has their own computer. It's a shared unit workstation that they use to do their charting, and then they go home, so there's not really that type of opportunity for them. I
remember the first time I even discovered that being able to remote into somebody else's computer was a thing, being able to connect to somebody's computer and control it. I was a teenager and I was hanging out with one of my best friends, and he had installed it on his older brother's computer at his house. And he's like, hey, let's connect to his computer and see what he's up to from my computer. And I was like, all right.
Nice.
And so we connected to it, and lo and behold, he was definitely looking at some not safe for work material in real time. And we got the great idea, because this was back when a lot of people didn't even know that you could do this.
Yeah.
And we were pretty sure he didn't know. So we got the great idea to pretend we were God and just mess with him. And so we got into like the area where you type in the web address on the browser and started writing him messages about like, hey, we know what you're doing. We're watching you.
Yep.
Things like that. And he like freaked out.
Yeah. Just go over and be like, hey, I heard you talk to God today, man. Wild.
I remember, he was like, that was you. It's like, you saw what I was doing? So when people remote into my computer at work, on one hand, I'm grateful for it because I know they're just going to go ahead and fix my issue. Right. But on the other hand, it's a pride thing. Like, I could fix it myself. I bet I could.
There's that component for sure. The way I like to think is like, it's kind of like your car. It's like, don't drive my car like that. The clutch is a little weird there. Like, oh no, that's over there. It's a very like unique, personalized experience. Even if it's not really that personal of a computer, everybody's gonna think like, well, this is my computer. I know exactly. And they probably do,
or some of them.
Yeah. And there's people that are just anarchists that have files saved all over the desktop with no file structure whatsoever, and it's just 300 icons, and my eyes want to bleed. If you're one of those people, go see a priest or a therapist. Thank you.
Okay, well, now I'm getting to the questions that you probably have somewhat prepared for. What would be like an example of the worst, most ridiculous type of tech support experience you had to offer? Either it be because of what they needed help with or the person themselves.
Well, there's a couple different definitions of worst here. Worst in the sense of most annoying, most irritating, most frustrating for me personally was I was a subcontractor for a contractor of a contractor. So just think about what that meant for my pay. I took a pay cut going from security, fighting with homeless people for a living, to fixing computers that belonged in pharmacies and rehab and the emergency departments. It's pretty sensitive stuff. I took a pay cut to do that. And while I was taking a pay cut to do that, we had 3 staff members at one point, and we had an on-call rotation. So if something went down in the emergency room, they couldn't print their prescriptions at 3 a.m. We got paged. So you were on call one week. backup on call for the next, and then you had 1 week off. And we did that for about 3 months because we were good enough at our jobs that we kept making all of our metrics. And because of that, we just kept getting more and more crazy stuff assigned to us. And the most annoying one for me was it was just so far out of my pay grade at the time that was the most frustrating. That was the worst issue that I'd come across because it was like, this isn't my job, man. They had me install a SQL server, which is just a big database for the program that runs the entire hospital's HVAC system. So their ventilation, their air conditioning, everything for the ORs, for their pressure, humidity, temperature control.
So you're saying it was unnecessary?
It was not my job. It was
out of scope.
It was out of scope, and I was getting paid $14 an hour to do this, which in Seattle is like, oh, you poor thing. That was just the most annoying thing. It was because like these faceless contractors who were in Portland at the time didn't even know me, never met me, were just expecting me to do this type of thing. It's like, well, that's kind of like, dude, why don't you come over here and do this then? You know. But that was more of just a frustration as a job performance or job satisfaction standpoint. The ones that I get to laugh the most about now are some of the users. And favorite one, I'll remember this ticket until the day I die. It just made me laugh so hard. Was I got a ticket for a broken keyboard. And it was something along the lines of, please send technician to repair or replace leaky keyboard.
Leaky?
And I just want you to think about that for a second. A leaky keyboard. As though there's some fluid in this keyboard that's supposed to be there and is now leaking, which is causing the problem. It's implying that, oh, hey, you know, the coolant reservoir on the backspace key, it's failing, guys. We need to get that keyboard replaced ASAP. Or like the hydraulic line between the keyboard and the USB, it's got a fault somewhere, man. We got to like.
So did they spill something on it?
Of course, they spilled some coffee on it. It's funny. Users will try to kind of like, oh, I don't know, it's leaking. You know, just tell us what happened. We're not going to charge you for the equipment. It's the state pays for it, man. You've already paid for it.
So it's they worded it that way to remove their fault.
Yeah, and to kind of like just the phrasing of that makes me still laugh. It's like, yep, you got to go replace that reservoir now. You know, it's sure leaking. It's going to cost you extra. You know how rare that coolant fluid is anymore? They don't make it. That was probably my favorite ticket I got. But, you know, then there's just other ones that are frustrating where, you know, you go to a workstation and, well, my USB cable's too short. Okay, well, I'll bring an extension up, go down there, and it's just, you know, it's coiled up under the desk. It's like, well, you didn't look to see if you had more cable down there or it was caught on something? Well, no, why would I do that? And I remember the lady that said that to me. I remember her face when she said that to me. And I was like, I don't know, maybe because you're a competent human with a problem that you might be able to solve? Like, why am I up here?
Yeah. Do you sometimes find yourself in situations where it's easier to just help them and give them what they want if it's going to end it versus if you know the fault is on their end, or like, you know, you look under the desk and you see that it's coiled up? Is it easier sometimes to just give them the extension cable and like let them think that that's what they needed? Or do you usually just, if you identify what the root cause is, you make sure that they know at the expense of how they might negatively respond to you?
It depends. It all depends. If it's somebody who clearly thinks that, oh, IT, yeah. And maybe not even so much that, but if somebody is actively rude to not just myself, but if I know they're being difficult to work with another team member, it makes, and I think this doesn't just apply for IT, I think this goes across for, you know, pretty much anyone in the service industry. It's so much easier to get good help if you're nice, because
this is advice for everything in life, right?
Because you're kind of biting the hand that feeds when you go to the IT guy and you start accusing him of breaking your computer. And it's like, well, I didn't touch it, lady, but maybe you should deal with it because you're just being insufferable. And I'm sure your computer's twice as bad. I'm a professional, of course. I fix the problem every time. If there's an opportunity for some education afterwards, then depending on how I've been treated and how they appear to be receiving it, I might engage in a little bit of scholarly education for them. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think one of the big things is, again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about this is their job. A lot of times they don't want to be doing it if they're sitting down and charting and whatever. They signed up to be a nurse to save people's lives, right? They didn't sign up to just do paperwork all day. And then when they lose their paperwork because the computer crashed or their internet crashed, you know, what have you, like, that's just kind of something that as an IT professional, you gotta be empathetic to, or like I said, it's gonna drive you insane because you're kind of dealing with people, not necessarily at their worst, but they're not having a good time if they're calling you.
Well, they might have lost a lot of the work that they were.
Yeah, and I've totally dealt with that. And, you know, I've come into a situation where someone's been just ranting like, oh, this dumb computer's always, you know, and if you can get in there and, you know, do a document recovery and save some of their folders, man, that might change their entire experience and how they view IT. So,
Savior.
Yeah. So you can actually actively make a positive impact on somebody's perceptions of things and take that and make a learning and a good experience out of a bad situation. And that's kind of what I always try to do because, I'm hot-headed, man, too. I got a little bit of that Irish fighting streak in me. So I understand when you get feisty and it's like, I got this bill and it's dumb and I don't want to pay it. And so
it's like your reptilian brain taking over.
Exactly.
It's the emotional side of you that it's hard to keep in check.
Yeah. And I think, definitely working in IT, seeing these types of situations come up, it has definitely helped me keep things in perspective a little bit better as far as what happens when a computer crashes or if I lose data, or it's definitely been interesting to kind of take that into evaluation and see how it impacts my life as well. Because I think, a lot of people if you're in the IT trade, sometimes technicians get very focused on the problem and how they're treated. And it's not about that. It's about we're paid by a company to fix people's problems. And let's do that, and let's make their day better in the process, because I think that you absolutely have the impact to shape people's opinions on things. We are always in the desktop support team that we are the face of IT. And I think that's kind of a really big thing. When somebody calls help desk, they never see help desk. They never see anybody there. They don't know who they are. And that's already a negative factor that people have to deal with. So by the time you're out there, you can really make somebody's day just by doing something as simple as reorienting their monitors for them. It's, whoa, my taskbar's down here and I want it up here now. Okay, well, done. Is there anything you need to see? Wow, that was fast. How did you do that? It can be such a positive experience for somebody. So
it's like lifting 2 gallons of milk for your grandmother and her being like, "You're so strong, Nicholas."
Exactly. So it's it's that type of a reaction or an impression that I think IT should have on people. I think when they call IT, they should have that kind of experience. So that's my personal opinion on it. And
so we've talked about worst experiences, funniest experiences. What about, have you ever come up with like a solution to a user's problem that would have made MacGyver proud?
Yes, I have. It's not a question of what have I done, but what haven't I done with some redneck tomfoolery. There have been times, again, this goes back to the short staff days when I was a contractor of a contractor of a contractor. I wrote a script and I automated a process that our system admins had been too busy to look at for 3 months. It was just a super simple script that was used to synchronize some databases, and everybody on my team was like, wow, man, awesome, thank you, because we used it daily. We ran the script like 4 times a day, 5 times a day. And, that was pretty cool. One of the biggest things was I went back and I kind of reverse engineered how this machine called a compounder worked. It's a medical pharmacy application. It's a device that mixes different like chemicals or solutions for different medications. So for like radiation treatment, for saline solutions, anything where they need to mix 2 different solutions, they use this compounder. And it was a Windows 95 machine with no keyboard and mouse. They didn't know the IP address. They didn't know the MAC address. They didn't know anything about this device, and it was offline. And until they got it fixed, nobody could get radiation treatment or nobody could get anything from that machine.
That's not good.
Yeah. So I managed to figure out pretty much everything about it. I figured out the login. I figured out the network password. I figured out the exact sequence that I had to do to log into the computer to get it to not go to the automated launched program, Windows Me, so Windows 2000 Millennium Edition or something like that. When I walked out of there,
that was better than Vista.
Yeah. Is it running Vista? We're all doomed. Sorry, that's a IT crowd joke. But as far, man, I'm sure that I've done some redneck stuff. The first computer that I broke was, like I mentioned it earlier, I welded a Xbox circuit board to a computer frame because I didn't know that the power supply was not grounded. And when I turned it on, it welded itself to the computer case because, I had a spare computer case laying around, and why wouldn't you just put the guts of an Xbox in it for fun? Yeah, man. Anything else is probably an OSHA violation.
Well, at this time, I would like to transition to a new topic, which is tips and tricks.
Oh, I got a bunch.
Yeah, so let's start with this. I know that you work as a network specialist. Cable management is something that I personally struggle with. I am embarrassed to show you my computer desk because there's definitely opportunity for improvement. I think that just recently, I think last night, my fiance was like, yeah, that's an eyesore over there. And I was like, yeah, you're right. But I mean, it's challenging. I mean,
it is.
I wish we lived in an era where all of our electronics were wireless.
Almost there.
And they could charge without cables, that would be really great.
Almost there.
It's so barbaric to just have these little dangly wires everywhere. Like, we're going to get there.
They've already have, I just learned this last week. They have wall switches, like toggles for lights that generate power just based off of, minor vibration in the wall, and the actuation of the switch itself generates enough power to generate a Bluetooth signal to whatever smart home device you've got. And that'll, no wires. It's all just an integrated, motion or energy capture system.
So it's coming.
It's coming.
But in the meantime,
yes.
Are the wires in your house pretty well managed? Would you say they're up to the same kind of code that you are expected to keep in your role at work?
Finally, for the first time after buying this house, yes. Previously, I was kind of like, whatever, just throw it behind the TV. And
well, if you can hide it, who cares, I guess. But if it's out in the open, it's like you see it and you're just like, I could do better.
Yeah, I've always had it more or less tucked away, but one of the best things that I can advise is just have Velcro. Just get some Velcro and find your excessive loops. It's so much easier to do it when you start setting things up, because then it turns into this rat's nest of just cables, and it's like it becomes 3 times the task. So if you get ahead of it while you're starting, that you're going to save yourself so much headache in the long run.
Yeah.
But yeah, just get some Velcro. Get a pair of scissors that just stays with the Velcro. And anytime you add something, just take 5 minutes. And the most important part that got me for the longest time when I was starting out, leave some slack. Don't make it too tight everywhere, because if you need to adjust a monitor or you get a phone that you need to install on your desk somewhere and you got to scoot something around, just leave a little bit of slack, 4 or 6 inches on either end, and that'll make you so much happier than having to go back behind the TV, pull out the entertainment center
and redo it.
Yeah, that's probably my biggest tip for that.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. I should probably act on that.
Yeah. Easier said than done, right?
Well, I think when you set it up the wrong way, it takes a lot of motivation to want to take it all apart and do it the right way. But I imagine right now there's probably like a listener out there that's like staring at all their wires and they're just like, ugh.
How dare you call me out? Don't attack me like this.
I feel personally attacked
by this relatable content.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's how I feel. Okay, so that's very helpful for cable management. What about some tips and tricks that you'd recommend to just an average user out there of, the Windows operating system for a computer who doesn't know a lot about optimizing or maintaining their computer? They just buy the computer and they use it to go on websites.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much the extent of what they do. I just hear a lot of people, it's the same things over and over again. Their computer starts to be slow. Things start to pop up that they didn't recognize that they installed by accident.
Yeah.
What would you say to that person?
So there's a lot of applications out there nowadays that will help with that type of management. The 2 that I use on pretty much any computer that somebody comes to me and says, hey, what do I need to do to make this faster? 2 of the ones that I'll recommend right off the bat are going to be a program called CCleaner by Puriform. What it does is it goes through and scans all of your just kind of junk files, and it'll go through and say like, oh, well, this is your temporary files from Internet Explorer, from Chrome, from my documents, and it'll clear all that stuff out automatically. 90% of the time, it's not anything that you'd ever even see. It's just kind of, think about it like the clutter on your doorway, nightstand or whatever. If you've got like an entryway, you never notice how that just tends to be full of crap after like 6 months. It's like, oh, I got to go and clear that off again. Or like your nightstand, or it's just one of those types of things where it just generates stuff and you're not sure how I got there, but it's taking up space and you got to deal with it. So CCleaner does that really well. And it also has a feature called the registry fix, which will go through, and that's a major component of Windows. It's kind of, you think about it like a phone book for all the applications and things that live on your computer. That's where they reference it from. And if there's too many bad entries in there that aren't valid, or go to programs or things that don't exist, that can cause some problems. So with CCleaner, it addresses both of those issues. It does it really well. It's been very stable on anything I've ever used it on, and it just gets the job done. And it's usually a pretty noticeable improvement almost right away if it's a computer that's been around for a year or 2.
Is there something similar for people's smartphones?
I can't say that I've ever actually really had to look into that too much, because
probably not a need.
Yeah, planned obsolescence. We just went back to that earlier, but
that's a good point.
Yeah, no. So as far as smartphones go, just memory management, just clear out stuff you don't use all that often, and if you have the opportunity, back up your pictures, clear your pictures out. That's
don't fill up your hard drive all the way.
Yeah, that will actually also cause some pretty serious issues. It'll start to just kind of throttle and it'll run out of allocation space. So your disks will just start spinning a lot more, which is bad for them if you're on an older hard drive.
What percentage of your hard drive are you supposed to keep free at a minimum?
I mean, I go by at 25% max. If you have 75% full on your hard drive, it's time to buy a second hard drive and start storing stuff there.
I can't tell you how many people ask for my help to look at their computer and their hard drive is completely full.
Yeah, that's
it's almost every time.
Yeah, and it's like, well, it's got nowhere to go. It's got nowhere to put these files. It's it's got to have temp space.
It starts acting up.
Yeah, if you don't have any swap space or temp space, which is it's a nerd term for free space, your computer just starts doing a lot of weird things. And hard drives are so cheap. And they're very easy to install these days. You don't have to worry about like master slave. Where's the ID cable? It's just...
Or just get an external and plug it in a USB port.
Yeah, for 90% of people, I'd recommend, if you don't want to open a computer up, which is totally... I wouldn't want to if I didn't know anything about it. Yeah, external hard drives, man. They're cheap. They're easy. They're reliable. And they will save you a lot of headache. And then there was one other application that I use pretty frequently, and it's to scan for malware. It's called Malware Bytes.
So for our listeners at home, what is malware? Explain that to a 5-year-old.
It's kind of a generalized term for something bad that you don't want on your computer. It's just,
it's a catch-all term.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little broader than virus because virus is referring to one more specific type of event. But malware is just a bad thing that you don't want on your computer.
Okay. An ask.com toolbar.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So many types of those things. They're technically fall under like adware, where it's just, sending you ads all the time. Malware Bytes will scan for that type of thing, and then it will quarantine it accordingly. So effectively just get rid of it from your system. And that's BYTES at the end.
I'll put it in the show notes so that people can click the link if they are interested.
Yeah. And I'm not sponsored by either. I just love both of them because they make my life better. So
I've read some tips and tricks that people had online, and one of them is related to what you were talking about, which is that you should take care when installing software, especially free stuff from the internet, and to not just click next on every window that pops up, and to read the screens and make sure that you're not installing these extra toolbars or additional software that you don't actually want.
Right.
And a lot of people, they think that you have to install all these extra things when they're installing something, and they don't realize they have the option to untick that box and not install it along with what they wanted. And you just have to stop and read. Don't just click next, because that's how you end up with a bunch of stuff in your computer that's bad for it or you don't want.
Exactly. And that's a lot of these companies, they almost engineer it to be misleading in a lot of cases. And it's this is kind of a component that fascinates me of the IT world, is the psychology of user interactions. Because when you're looking at a website, and I'll use one off the top of my head that I know because it's something that almost everybody uses, Adobe, right? Adobe PDF or Adobe Flash. If you go to Adobe's website to download either of these programs, and yes, I am calling you out, Adobe, I see you. When you go to download these programs, you actually have to manually uncheck the box that says, would you like to install our junk bloatware, adware toolbar now?
Yeah. I think it's a terrible business practice. It makes me see them differently after that.
Yeah. And all the companies that have the most of my respect are the ones that are like, hey, right up front and honest, would you like to sign up for our mailing list?
Like Google.
Yeah.
I think Google's like, look, we're spying on your entire life, but we respect you. Kind of.
Yeah. There's a more friendly version of Big Brother. But yeah, there's I think that, companies that kind of treat you like, look, man, you're a human that's just trying to get a thing done. We respect that. Go do your thing. If you'd like to sign up for our newsletter, if you'd like some more promotional offers, we're very transparent about it. They're right here. As opposed to like signing up for Groupon, where once you've hit the yes button and you're like, no, I didn't uncheck the subscription. You just have emails for 13 days straight with nothing but, would you like to get your hair styled this weekend? Would you like to go out to bar? Would you like to, like, no, man, I'm just staying home. Okay.
And it's really frustrating that companies do that because they're ruining the computer experience for people who don't understand how to get rid of that stuff.
Exactly.
And then when you go to try to help them, you're like, you realize that they've been struggling with this for a while. They've been having to deal with this for a while. And I feel bad for the users who don't know how to remove it. Honestly, I feel like it should be illegal.
It absolutely should. It's kind of the scammy, if you ever go to like Las Vegas, it's kind of the equivalent of people like slapping the, would you like to go to the strip club type things? It's coming up right in your face. It's that real life equivalent on your computer. And it's like, man, I don't want to deal with this. And I just a clip that summarizes this so perfectly. It's from the IT crowd again. I'll send you a link to it and hopefully maybe include it in the footnotes. But it's one of the users who's very much not a computer person, has a virus, and she's like, "Oh no, don't delete that. Like I know how to work around that virus. I just need a browser." But yeah, it's a very negative experience for somebody who's already, if you're just like logging on to pay your PUD bills or whatever, your utility bills. You're like, I don't want to be on the computer already anyway. I don't want to go to the browser. I don't want to, it just makes a potentially stressful situation that much worse.
For sure. One of the things that I used to do for myself when my computer was acting slow, I would open up msconfig and disable any startup items that I didn't need. Yep. And then I'd go to the services section and I'd hide the Microsoft services so I didn't screw anything up that I needed to run.
Yeah.
And then I could disable any services that I didn't need to run. And then I'd apply that and restart my computer. And that usually made it function a lot quicker. And so that used to be like one of my go-tos for like when I'd go over to a friend's house or a family member's house, is I'd go in there and I'd see 30 things starting up and a million services. And then you can see sometimes malware running there, like blatantly. I'm like, what is this program? XAB297 like .exe? Like, do you realize this is running on your computer? And they'll just be like, what's that? I'm like, that's something you didn't ask to run, is it? And they're like, no.
Yeah, and you get somebody that doesn't know any better. It's like, well, I thought this is just what the computer needed. Like,
it's like a person riding in the back seat of your car that you didn't let into your car. They're just like going along for the ride.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, hey, who are you?
Look, Mr. Totally Not Spyware.com.exe. Like, that was a good way of managing it back in probably Windows XP, Windows 7 days. Windows 10, I will say this, they actually do make it a very easy process to find out what's starting when your computer starts up. I think, in fact, if you just go type in startup on like the start menu, it'll take you, it should be an option. One of the first hits is like, see what's starting with my computer.
Yeah, they word it in language that an average person would understand instead of some kind of code for a program.
Yeah, they've done a very good job of that. I think, honestly, I'm a Linux person, have been for 10 years now, but Microsoft is doing a very good job with Windows 10, and it's a very streamlined, very easy to navigate experience that I think is probably their best since Windows 7.
The only thing I didn't like about Windows 10 is the way they went about forcing everyone to have it. Where people would be like, I don't want it. I want to stay on Windows 7. And then people would like keep delaying the upgrade, and then it would like do it in the middle of the night when they're asleep or something, and they'd wake up and they'd be like, no!
Just imagine a guy like with a mask with like a little Microsoft logo on his shirt, like sneaking into your house, like, I'm going to install this.
But I mean, I guess, it's for the best, I guess. You got to have everyone on it in order
to provide a unified experience.
Yeah.
A Mac did that. That's been their model all along. And Microsoft is trying to probably, I don't want to say emulate, but they realize the value in that approach. And I think they're trying to kind of go in that direction. Yeah. And I think they've done a very good job of it. And I think if they keep doing what they're doing, I think they're going to be just fine.
So related to what we were talking about with accidentally installing things you don't want, there's another tool that I've come across that I think is helpful to mention called Ninite. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, but it's a program that installs. So when you get a new computer, you go to this website called Ninite, and it has a list of 50 of the most common programs the average person would use on their computer. And so you tick boxes on all the software that you would want on your computer that you need.
Right.
And it gives it all to you in one installer.
Oh, cool.
And it bypasses all of the toolbars or drive-by, extra things that you don't want to accidentally install. So it just loads it all in one time, and it installs it all at once.
That's very cool.
So I think if you're a person out there that just got a new computer, you just want to get your Chrome, get your VLC, get your basic apps.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good program. If I was setting up, numerous computers at a time or just one, it sounds like a cool opportunity.
All right. Well, so we're almost at the end. But before I give you the final word, I would like to ask you a few questions from what people said on Facebook.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Totally.
So one person asked that they wish that they knew more about VPNs and what my ISP knows about what I'm doing?
That is
LOL.
And that's a very good question. That's probably something that we're going to be seeing a lot more of coming in the future. So a VPN can come in several.
So what does that stand for, first of all?
So it stands for a virtual private network, and it's used to kind of, I don't want to say hide or mask because it makes it sound a little more nefarious, but it's just used to kind of anonymize your traffic. You can set it up so that it looks like your network traffic is coming from somewhere else, essentially is what it boils down to.
And so why would that be useful to the average person?
Well, we'll go with one of the good examples is in places that have web lockdowns. Like I think in Egypt or Libya, there were some crackdowns on the internet during one of the revolutions there. And people were using VPNs to say that my internet access is coming from outside of this region. My internet access is coming from Italy, where there's no restrictions. There's no blocks. They can get out to the world. They can share their version of what's going on. They can share the narrative that maybe a government's trying to repress. That's one of the more positive experiences and how a VPN has definitely made a positive impact on the world. And then, you've just got your end users in Canada that want to watch Netflix. And I think it was Canada. Some governments had Netflix. They hadn't established, I guess would be their equivalent to the FCC guidelines on how to get that going. So people would just create a VPN, say that I'm in the United States, and then they could watch whatever.
Well, yeah, right. Like some content on Netflix is region locked. And so some people will get a VPN just to watch the show they want to watch in a different country.
Exactly. Which, the legality of that is questionable, but it all kind of comes back just down to like the security, if you don't want people tracing you, if you don't want people tracking your IP address, which you could very reasonably have a need for if you've got, all your resources on your home network, you've got your pictures, you've got things that are personal and private.
Basically, you have a right to your privacy. Right. And if it's something that you want, you should have the ability to do it.
Yeah. And it's just kind of an extra layer of security that if someone were going to try and hack, they'd have to get through that. So there are several ways you can go about setting one up. Windows 10 actually has an integrated VPN server. They have the feature that you can use right out of the box. I've never had to install it or configure it, but I do know that it's there as an option. A lot of routers these days, the wireless routers or the routers that you install from your internet service provider, some of those will have a VPN option as well. And one of the other benefits of VPN is you can access your home network remotely. So you can say that I want to remote into my desktop or I want to access a file on my server. You can just set up your laptop VPN to say that your traffic is coming from inside your own network, essentially. And you'll have access to everything on your resource, like you're sitting at home using your own Wi-Fi.
Oh, okay.
So that's another one of the more...
It's kind of cool.
Yeah. Get so security focused sometimes that sometimes I forget about like, oh yeah, people use it for like using all their media shares and stuff. And I think one of the third and probably the most common and easy to set up version of that is there are our third-party VPNs that you can just download and install.
I think another person on Facebook, they asked if you had a particular provider that you would vouch for or anyone that you would tell people to check out if they were interested in getting a VPN. NordVPN is very good. They're generally some of the highest regarded in the industry. I use VPN 360 on my phone. It's a free service. Yeah, Nord is the big one though that I've seen just kind of time and time again is something that's consistently high quality. Somebody else asked, why do I have to flip my USB 6 times before it goes into the port? You would think twice would do the trick.
They're magnetically oriented to this north and south pole, and due to the gravitational interference and magnetic fields, that'll actually automatically rotate with a gyroscope, depending on your orientation. So my recommendation would be to flip it upside down and put it on a magnet first.
That sounds like a legitimate answer. They're going to take you seriously.
Yeah, that's the other reason why you're nice to IT people. They will make you look silly if you do something mean to them.
I do like the idea of having ports that there's only one correct way to put the wire into it.
Yeah, the Lightning and USB-C.
Yeah, USB-C is great. You can't screw it up.
Yeah, I do enjoy that quite thoroughly. It's been nice not feeling like a dummy every time I go to plug something in.
Okay. And the final question that I have to ask you from social media, somebody says, as I slowly learn coding /programming/networking, it would be great to hear how one handles project management, whether it's on a small scale or working with a team. What has worked for you with learning new skills, either in tech or working with a team?
So what's worked for me as far as learning new skills, either independently or in a team?
Or and how you handle the project management side of it.
Well, thankfully, I have a pretty strong base to fall back on as far as learning goes. And that's something that I've just kind of built by trial, honestly. Whenever we have a new concept into play, for example, my team, we have an event that goes on that takes down up to 4 switches at a time, and each switch has 48 connections, or depending on the model, up to 60. So you're looking at a lot of users being affected by work, right? Well, somebody came up with a way to bypass that so that we can keep everybody up while the work is being done. And it involves creating a backfeed to a secondary router and,
So rerouting.
Rerouting. And you take one switch and perform the upgrade at a time. And I know we're getting a little far from the question, but we'll come back to it. And that process was really confusing, and it was very new to me. And I didn't really understand the way that it was done. So I went to the guy that came up with the idea, and I just sat down with him, and we got a conference room and a whiteboard, and he just drew it all out. And then when I had questions, I'd ask him and say, okay, well, when you break the uplink because you've transitioned off of this router interface, we're on this router interface now, this link goes down. Well, what happens? And then he'll explain like, oh, well, when the primary link goes down, they'll still have network connectivity through this backfeed, and it's propagated this way. And so I guess the answer to that was being in a team setting, just talk to your people. Talk to people and don't be afraid to ask questions, because you'd much rather find out you don't know the topic in a conference room on a whiteboard as opposed to 2:00 in the morning in the OR data closet that supports the only tier 1 trauma center in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, that'd be bad.
As you are doing the event, and then all of a sudden all the ORs are down with no internet. So just ask the questions. And when it comes to like personal education and just doing your own independent studying, YouTube has been great. I watched a lot of YouTube videos on networking. If I ever had a question, there's so many smart people on YouTube that just like have a way of explaining things that makes sense. A lot of them are teachers and whatnot. So there's a lot of really good information out there. And if you have access to this type of stuff, just kind of build a little environment, A lot of it stays in the book until it's not in the book anymore. You can really understand the theories, but until you actually go in, it's kind of cheap now, especially if you don't mind getting like used stuff. You don't need the fastest little home network. You can go out and buy a little router, a little switch, and put an IP address on that switch and create a virtual local area network. But yeah, just kind of, and just play with it. That's, for me, the best advice I can give is just go,
get your hands dirty.
Yeah. If you've got $200, go to, Goodwill has some stuff, man, you wouldn't believe. Just, go out and buy a little router and see if you can get something running. It doesn't even have to be connected to the internet, just build, 2 computers and have a little hub between them, and see if you can transfer files, just anything you can do to take away the fear. Cause I think that's what stops a lot of people. It's like, oh, computers are scary. If you break it, you break it. And
it came from Goodwill.
Yeah. And it came from Goodwill. So you're not out of any money, but, it's the best learning experiences I've had have been some of the things that I've broken the worst. So
yeah, got to get that experiential learning in.
Yeah. So did that address the question well enough? I think
they were talking about, how do you, part of the question was, how did you learn new skills in tech? So I think you addressed that, but I think they were also interested in maybe talking about how you handle project management. But I think you also addressed that by talking about just making sure that you communicate.
Yeah. And that's a big part of it. I've been put in positions where as the contractor of a contractor, I had to deploy an entirely new model of hardware for patient bedside barcode scanners. Nobody was A, there, or B, had the time. And, I made the time, stayed a little bit late, came up with some, how-to documents that we stationed in the room so that if people had questions on how to, configure or pair the barcode scanners to their base, they had documentation there. And when it comes to stuff like that, what I find is you hone the process down to the most efficient way you can get it done, and then write that up and go off of the own instructions that you wrote, or have somebody else in your office go through that set of instructions. And if it works, then there you go. And you can go from there and create a base of like, okay, how long will this task take? And if we have this many devices and they need to go in this many rooms, and how long is it going to take to install? Am I going to be able to hit every room on the first try? And just kind of build your timetable from there. It can pretty wildly vary depending on what the task is, but you learn a lot as you go, and just getting out there and not being afraid to start doing it. And I'm the type of person that if something needs to be done and nobody else is doing it, then I'm going to do it. So I think having that kind of mentality as well is very helpful as far as just learning new skills. It needs to be done, so let's do it,
Yeah. Well, Matt, I want to thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And before we go, I'd like to give you the final word. Any closing thoughts or requests that you have? Any words of wisdom you'd like to leave our audience with?
Oh boy. Have you turned it off and on again? Is it plugged in? If your computer's going slow, get a bigger hard drive. If it's going real slow, get a new hard drive that's a solid state drive. That's one of the biggest upgrades you can make. Upgrade your RAM. If you're running less than 4 gigs, you could use more. If your Wi-Fi is slow, if you're using an old device, get a USB adapter that can do faster speeds. Don't put your computers on the carpet. That's bad. That's bad for airflow, bad for ventilation. You will get dust. It'll break up the computer and it'll melt the fans. Bad things happen. Just don't do it. And you are not always going to get 1 gigabyte per second internet from a 1 gigabyte per second wireless router if you do not have a 1 gigabyte per second internet connection from your ISP. Don't save your credit card numbers on sites that are not secure. I wouldn't save them on any at all, unless it's maybe with like Google because they kind of care about encryption and safety. But if you're going to nanasweaters.com or iloverhododendrons.net to make a purchase and they offer to store your credit card information there, maybe don't do it because you don't know what kind of security they have on that website. It could be hacked, it could be leaked, and with a small website like that, they probably have substantially less security in place than somewhere like Amazon. So potentially just save yourself from a little bit of pain there. And then last, I think the biggest financial security thing is don't autofill your passwords for your bank. Don't autofill your credit card for anything. If you need to make a purchase, take the extra 30 seconds, pull out your credit card, do it that way, because when somebody hacks your Google account, and guess what? All of your data is in there for all of your purchases and there's no authentication needed anymore. They can buy themselves whatever lovely gift they'd like. So the best security is not creating the ability for the data to be stolen to begin with.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the John Top of It podcast. If you want to know more about anything mentioned in this episode, visit johntopofit.blog for links and show notes. If you found this podcast interesting and helpful, please subscribe so I can automatically connect you to all things I find interesting and helpful in the future. Also, share it with your friends and family. I'd love to connect interesting and helpful info to as many of your loved ones as possible. Also, if you could leave me a positive rating and review on iTunes, I'd really appreciate it. This helps people find this podcast within a sea of other ones on iTunes. Finally, what do you need help with? Or what do you find interesting? Let me know on Twitter at JohnTopofit. That's JONTOPOFIT. If you're selected, I'll use your input as inspiration for an upcoming episode. That's all for now. See you in the next episode.